The proceedings of the opening ceremony will begin shortly. All ambassadors wishing to hold the first opening speech, please approach the dais. All ambassadors wishing to hold the first opening speech, please approach the dais now. Again, all ambassadors that wish to hold the first opening speech, please approach the dais now.
Hello, just as a quick announcement, please do not play with the microphones. We know it's tempting, they're right in front of you, but please do not.
Will the House please come to order? Honorable Secretary General, esteemed Deputy Secretary Generals, student officers, the Junior MUN Committee joining us over live stream from another room, distinguished delegates, Frau Dr. Boschianza, Professor Dr. Eckehardt-Strauss, Ms. Hale, directors, and guests. On behalf of the BERMUN2 team, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the 19th Annual BERMUN2 Conference. My name is Maya Hauf, and I have the honor of serving as President of the General Assembly at this year's conference. Seated to my left is Paul Kepler-Gurris, this year's Secretary General, and to my left, further left and right are Moana Kamara and Mila Ward, who will be serving as this year's Deputy Secretary Generals.
On behalf of all participants, we would like to thank the Konrad Adenauer Foundation for their support of our conference for 18 years. We have greatly appreciated the assistance of Frau Dr. Buschianza and Herr Felix Bäumel. Additionally, we would like to extend our gratitude to Dr. Clemens Brüggemann for his collaboration in planning to make this a successful conference. We are grateful that Dr. Buschianza, the Deputy Head of Political Education and Manager of Political Educational Forums, will now address us on behalf of the CAS. Dr. Buschianza, you now have the floor.
Dear participants, congratulations on taking part in the 24 Berlin Model United Nations Conference. I'm delighted to look in so many young faces at this moment, and on behalf of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, I would like to extend a warm welcome to you. It is a great pleasure for us to host this conference at our academy, a premises where we see us as a forum for dialogue between politics, business, science, and society. But before we start, please allow me a personal remark. Some of you have been present last year when we paused for a moment to remember my colleague Andreas Kleine-Kraneburg, who held this opening speech for so many years. He passed away last year, and today is his birthday, and he would have been delighted to look in so many bright eyes. It's a privilege to address you as individuals because you are undertaking correspondence with the mission statement of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, Shaping Democracy Together. Through our work, we contribute towards securing and increasing peace, freedom and prosperity in Europe and throughout the world. Through our committed work, we strengthen the democratic and constitutional forces and institutions in Germany, Europe, and around the globe. We motivate, provide qualifications. We activate younger generations with respect to democracy. Shaping democracy together, that is not only our mission statement, it's your mission for the next days. Democracy cannot function without active people embodying the spirit of democracy, and that is exactly what will matter at the upcoming conference. As participants of the BERMUN conference, you will have the unique chance to experience the dynamics of multilateral negotiations firsthand. This is a one-in-a-lifetime experience that will not only give you a grasp of the complexity of international relations, but just as importantly, you'll have the opportunity to meet and learn so many peers who all share passion for the pressing questions of our time. Trying to reach consensus while representing countries so different in history, culture, and perspective will be a difficult task. You will have to weigh in your own personal interests and values against those opposing contrary beliefs. You must work hard to reach democratic consensus without conceding your own values. Throughout your deliberations, you will discover that such agreement is only possible by identifying and acting upon a common understanding of human rights and political values. We are living in a time of multiple crises and major challenges, to which nationalism has significantly contributed. Wars and armed conflicts, pandemics, refugee flows, these are just a few examples where international institutions can and must play a fundamental role in finding solutions. Therefore, it's a very good choice that you have chosen Rising Nationalism, Fortifying International Institutions as your theme for this year's conference. Values such as peace, justice, human rights, and sustainable development are threatened by nationalism worldwide. Here in Germany, we sometimes have rough political discussions, but in other regions in the world, it's a question of life and death. To see people fight for our values should encourage us to do our share, not only leave the field to populists and nationalists with supposed simple solutions to complex problems. We can raise our voices to ensure that global problems are solved globally and together. In 2024, more than 2 billion people will have the opportunity to vote. Elections are scheduled not only in German federal states, but also in the European Union, in the US, in India and other countries. So many places, nationalists and anti-democrats in many places, nationalists and anti-democrats are a threat to democracy. So this year, today, and at this moment, it is more relevant than ever to work for cross-border cooperation, for the coming together of different nations and people. Without strong international institutions, it will not be possible to solve many problems in our globalized world. We must keep in mind that regardless of which global challenges we are addressing, it will be impossible for one country to face it on its own. In joining the conference, you are preparing yourself for the role you will be assuming in the near future. I'm sure that the next 3 days will have an impact on your view of the world and hopefully for the rest of your life. Now I wish you a lively debate, lots of interesting insights, and above all, of course, a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bush-Jansa, for your kind welcome and for speaking on the importance of political dialogue in shaping democracy. We appreciate your comments and once again extend our thanks to the Konrad Adenauer Foundation for their continuous support. Please accept this token of our appreciation.
We are also thankful for the support of the John F. Kennedy School and are pleased to have the Assistant American High School Principal, Ms. Erin Hale, joining us. She has over 15 years of diverse experience as an educator, musician, and school leader. Before moving to Berlin with her family and joining the JFKS team, she taught instrumental music in Kansas City, Missouri. Ms. Hale, we're grateful that you're able to speak to us today. You now have the floor.
Good afternoon, and again, welcome to the 19th Annual Spring Conference of the Berlin Model United Nations. My name is Erin Hale, and I am the American High School Assistant Principal at the John F. Kennedy School. We are happy to welcome you back to Berlin and to the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. This year's conference, which includes over 200 participants from 30 schools and 9 countries, is a celebration of continuity and community. We are excited to provide you with an opportunity to engage in diverse ideas, exchange in honest and open discourse, and work together towards common goals. This conference is not possible without the help of many committed people and organizations. We would like to expressly thank the CAS and Frau Dr. Sandra Bush-Jansa for their long support of BERMUN2. Additionally, our appreciation and thanks to Herr Professor Eckhard Strauss for joining us as our keynote speaker. I would also like to thank and congratulate the students and staff of the Kennedy School for their efforts and hard work. To our BERMUN teachers and advisors, Jason Lang, Bill Robertson, Yvonne Kupp, Johannes Luke, and Andrea Robertson, we appreciate your commitment to our students and to the vision and mission of MUN. To the student members of BERMUN, who have also donated countless hours to the preparation and planning of this conference, thank you. Your passion and professionalism are unmatched, and we are proud to have you as representatives of JFK. The Secretariat for this year's conference, composed of JFKS students, Paul Kepler-Goris, Maya Hauf, Milana Kammerer, and Mila Ward, have chosen the theme, Rising Nationalism, Fortifying International Institutions. I cannot imagine a more appropriate theme that would align so perfectly with the mission and vision of the Kennedy School. It was in 1960 that German and American neighbors, whose children played together in the evenings and on the weekends, dreamed of a place where their children could also learn together. Similarly to the UN, they hope to promote harmony between cultures, model cooperation, and strengthen their partnership between their countries. Today, the Kennedy School mission of embracing international diversity based on mutual respect and cooperation is a direct reflection of the school. And similarly to the work that you will do over the next 3 days, we too look for ways to reform, reinvigorate, and strengthen our systems to ensure that we're meeting the needs of our students and remaining relevant in an ever-changing world. We must not take our bilingual, bicultural mission for granted, nor assume that the harmony, cooperation, and partnerships established 64 years ago are endlessly enduring. We know that we must continually cultivate and maintain these bonds, thus fortifying our unique place as an international institution. Throughout the conference, you will have the opportunity to debate the importance of international cooperation and work together to shape the conversation. I am excited to hear where your discussions and combined efforts lead. I encourage you, regardless of your experience, home language, or age, to actively engage in sessions. You bring unique perspectives, and your voice is important. Once again, welcome to the John F. Kennedy School and to this year's conference. We hope that you have fun and enjoy the next 3 days. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hale, for your kind introduction and for speaking about the importance of discourse and the connection between the values of the John F. Kennedy School and our conference theme. Please accept this token of our appreciation.
At this time, we would also like to thank Magdalena Mendelssohn, who has worked hard to realize our conference theme in this year's artwork. Depicted in the art is a half-finished puzzle of flags, representing the global community. The broken pieces represent states affected by nationalist ideology are being glued together by a bottle, depicting the logos of international institutions. The art highlights the destructive forces of nationalism and the role that international institutions play in fostering global cooperation. Let us give Magdalena a round of applause for her creative work.
Over the next 2 days, we will be debating a number of topics related to our conference theme, Rising Nationalism, Fortifying International Institutions. Therefore, we would like to invite Moana Kamara, my fellow Deputy Secretary General, to take the floor to elaborate on the connection between the committee topics and our conference theme. Moana has been a dedicated member of the BERMUN program for 3 years. Her outstanding work ethic and precise attention to detail has helped tremendously in preparation for the conference and keeping us all on track. Madam Deputy Secretary General, the floor is yours.
International cooperation, not nationalism. The essence of our theme and the sign of a fellow protester at a recent demonstration in Germany. The popularity of the far-right nationalist party AfD and reports of its involvement in a recent meeting discussing expulsion plans of millions with migrant backgrounds have sparked public outrage. But latest polls show the AfD at nearly 19% federally, just as other nationalist parties from the Netherlands to India have gained political support. This metric alone is an imperfect measure of nationalism. Factors like press freedom, topical to the PC and junior MUN, must also be observed. Yet, political scientist Dr. Monk confirms that we are globally witnessing, quote, an astonishing resurgence of nationalism, an ideology which holds the superiority of one's own country and ethnic group, as well as the desire for regional or international dominance. This clashes with the UN's belief in the equality of all humans, just as hegemonic aspirations hinder international cooperation, potentially stalemating its facilitating institutions. The South China Sea situation, the STC's topic, exemplifies this. The territory's claimants' rising nationalism fuels their desire for sovereignty over the area, as reflected in their adamant rejection of UN frameworks on the matter. In understanding states' behavior, three major political theories are relevant: realism, liberalism, and constructivism. In realism, the key actors of the volatile international system are states whose main goal is security. To this aim, they compete with military means. The more external pressure states are exposed to, the greater their desire to dominate, and by extension, their nationalism, typified in some states' reaction to the existential nuclear threat, attempting to bolster their nuclear capabilities, especially in tense situations, necessitating international frameworks like those addressed in the DC. Liberalism views states and non-state entities, such as international institutions, as key actors. States strive to achieve security, welfare, and justice through competing and cooperating using military, economic, and diplomatic means. Thus, ECOSOC delegates shall grapple with nationalism's economic symptoms, like protectionism, to ensure equal access to international markets. Key considerations are international institutions and the aforementioned goals. In constructivism, states and non-state actors are major players, yet rather than being uniform, states' goals, modes, and means of interaction are shaped by their culture, meaning that states' behavior can become truly horrific if ethnic justifications are abused to exclude and degrade minorities. In this genocidal manner, as the ICTY shall deliberate on, former Serbian President Milosevic utilized nationalist sentiments, ordering ethnic cleansing of Kosovar Albanians. Recapping, the J6's refugee topic shall demonstrate how all three theories interconnect. Failures in dealing with global issues such as climate change exert pressure on states, say via new refugee forms. The potentially resulting economic strain, in conjunction with groups promoting xenophobia, increases nationalism, as explained in realism and constructivism, respectively. This hinders international cooperation, blocking progress on crises in institutions, exacerbating the rise of nationalism. To break this vicious cycle, as we will strive to do at BERMUN2, we must actively work on fortifying our international institutions, a liberalist solution to be resilient for the challenges of our 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you, Moana, for highlighting the committee topic's connection to the overall theme and for elaborating on the impacts of nationalism on multiple theories on cooperation.
Next, I am pleased to introduce this year's keynote speaker, Professor Dr. Eckhard Strauss. He currently teaches public law, specifically human rights and police law, at the Berlin School of Economics and Law. Professor Dr. Strauss has over 25 years of experience working in management positions in international institutions, including the United Nations, where he primarily worked on the implementation of human rights standards and preventative sustainability standards. Thank you, Dr. Strauss, for taking time out of your schedule to address the forum today. You now have the floor.
Mr. Secretary General, Madams Deputy Secretary General, Madam President of the General Assembly, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak to you. I was asked to give a keynote speech on the subject of your conference, and I know that all and each of you will have prepared diligently for all of the technical and detailed questions that you are going to discuss in your very difficult negotiations. So what I would like to do is to try to reduce this whole subject back to 3 basic questions that I hope that in the heat of the negotiations and the complexity of discussions you are going to embark in the next 2 days, you will have, or you may have found helpful to come back to the point of what you're really trying to do in the course of this conference. I know from my own experience with multilateral complicated discussions that it's often helpful to be able to relate to very basic principles, very basic questions that you can rely on, so you find your way in all of these discussions. The 3 questions I would like to address is, first of all, what is nationalism? Secondly, what are international institutions? And thirdly, how are international institutions related to nationalism? So if we start with the first question, what is nationalism? Moana gave a definition already. There are other definitions that are out there. Is there anyone who would like to give your own definition of nationalism? What is it? Any suggestion? Nobody? You're all prepared, but nobody knows what nationalism is? Please.
A belief in the superiority of one's nation over others.
Okay, superiority of your own nation. What else? What else makes nationalism? Is it bad to think about your own nation as superior to others? Let's talk about football or something. Is it bad? What's bad about nationalism?
It's also an ideology that is very exclusive and justifies itself through preserving a national identity.
Okay, it's exclusive towards others. And what's bad about national identity?
Nothing is bad about national identity, but when it becomes exclusive and discriminatory towards others.
Okay, discriminatory, please.
Well, if nationalism is not there, then we could all work better together if we don't think like, I'm Germany and I want death from you, and if I just think we're all people and not so much nationalism on the country, and then it would be better to just think that we're all people and not.
Okay, one last.
A lot strict belief in the superiority of your own country might lead you to believe that you are entitled to the resources or territory of another country.
Okay, you are entitled to resources and territory of others. Okay, you made very important points. I would like to go with this definition of nationalism, and there are others around there. But I think it highlights best some of those elements that you actually raised. Where actually you think that the primary emphasis is the interest of your own nation, and where you promote this particular culture and interest, and you use it as opposed to other nations, and including to supranational groups, including international organizations. Why is nationalism problematic? It's problematic because of this. It's problematic because at the moment where you are putting your own nation ahead of others, where you give primacy to your nation versus others, you need to have a reason for that. And to argue these reasons goes in different directions. One is the perceived race of your particular group, which was the ideology of National Socialism. Others are claiming we have the more progressive political system. This is what socialism and communism did, and what sometimes Western governments and others are doing towards other governments. Or we say we have a higher state of civilization. That's the background of colonialism. So the importance is to keep in mind that the risk of nationalism is that because of this justification that you need, that you are starting to discriminate against others to justify that you have the priority. And this is important to keep in mind for the different discussions you are going to have. Nationalism is not only National Socialism, right-wing extremism, whatever. The question is, what is the reason I'm giving to say that I'm superior to others? And this is an example of what you see a lot with right-wing demonstrations when it comes to justifying why your nation is more important, should have a priority. But at the same time, we all have national interests. In your material that you will have used to prepare for these negotiations, you will have lists of what the interests of your particular country is. And as delegates of your country, you are expected to represent this. You are not paid for giving this away. So what is the difference to national interests? The difference is that national interests, and I'll try with another definition, that the interests of a nation as a whole held to be an independent entity separate from the interests of either subordinate groups within the same country or of other countries. So it's your interests that you are having, and that's a legitimate way of going about business. It's also linked to democracy. If I vote and a particular majority wins and there's a government in place that I have voted, I expect this government to represent what I have as an opinion. I don't expect the German government to give away what we voted for with regard to climate change, for instance, just to find a compromise. So national interest isn't bad, national interest is important. Then, in your negotiations and in the material that you used, how can you identify nationalism if you take these two parts? It depends, of course, on the definition, but I would say that for practical purposes, when you are analyzing the position of the government you are representing, whether it is in favor of its own perceived benefit, and that you do this on the costs of the benefit of other people, which can be negotiated success, unless you are doing it without regard to the normative valuations provided in human rights law, humanitarian law, refugee law. So this can be used as a self-test, and it can be used as a test when you look at what people are demanding. Is it nationalism or is it national interest? For me, the borderline or the line goes where I'm putting the benefits of my own nation on top of others, while I'm disregarding norms that I have agreed to. Human rights, humanitarian law, refugee law, other areas. The result of these tests, as you can see in many of the conflicts we are reading about in the media at the moment, it's not always very pleasant for the different nations. I may face that actually I'm doing exactly that. I'm putting the benefits of my own nation on top of the interests of other people, and I completely disregard human rights, humanitarian law, or refugee law. And this is why we normally use the attribute of nationalism for others. You hardly find a government that is claiming for itself to be nationalistic. Does democracy prevent nationalism? I don't disregard with what was said and what was presented in the material for your conference. But when you start negotiating, when you start discussing this, I would also invite you to realize that democracy itself cannot create these conditions that it requires to prevail. Democracy as a system makes decisions based on majority. And for this, it's possible for a democracy to vote in favor of nationalism, as you can see in a number of democracies, former democracies, that they did it. Of course, democratic institutions, in particular an independent judiciary, are more resilient regarding the implementations of such decisions, as far as they can control power and their decisions are implemented. If you have a judicial system, and I won't name any particular countries because you are involved in this and we find distinguished delegates from these countries, so I don't want to offend anyone, but look at judicial decisions that are made where government was found to be in fault of a constitution and they are simply not implemented. This is important. So ultimately, as was said already, it depends on the people and their understanding what nationalism is, and not to be favorable to and that this is not favorable to economic and political power. And that's an important argument for you to look at. Nationalism is not favorable to economic and political power. If I'm a nationalist state, I close towards relations with others, I enter into conflict with others, I don't have economic benefits for this. And this is something you can prove with regard to historic data if you look at how the different countries fared. So that's a very good argument to keep in mind against nationalism. You would like to look at the enforcement. Fortification was even used as an expression of international institutions. So what are international institutions? Why are they there? The main type of international institutions you will come across are international organizations. Those can be defined as organizations that are drawing on the membership from at least 3 states, having activities in several states, and whose members are held together by a formal agreement. That's when we talk about international organizations, what you find. The main example is the United Nations, what you are experiencing here. 193 member states, the most universal international organization, active in all of these 193 plus even more states, and mandated or held together by formal agreement that I will get to in more detail. Another example is the European Union, and a third example I would use, because you come across this organization a lot of times these days, is NATO. But this is not everything that makes nations. Nations are not only the governments which enter into the agreement of these international organizations, nations are also the population, the society. And this is why we need to look at what is civil society, what are NGOs. And that's maybe also important when you look at what you have prepared, what's the difference? People mix it up. And it's important, if you look at the role of democracies in international organizations, to understand what the difference is. Civil society is everything that is what we call the intermediary layer between the state level and the society. In democracies, this includes universities, formalized interest groups, groups of, advocates, whatever kind of other groups. This is civil society. And they require that they actually are not state-controlled. So when you come across in certain societies and countries a group of, like a formal chamber of lawyers, for instance, it can be civil society, but it doesn't have to. It depends on whether it's really between the state and the society or whether it's state-run. One organized element of civil society is non-governmental organizations. And it's not that just everyone can say, I'm a non-governmental organization. It's not a self-declaratory characteristic. A non-governmental organization requires at least that it has its own organs, so someone can act on behalf of this group, and that there is democratic decision-making as a process for the members. And that's important. It's one of the reasons why, for instance, the last generation here in Germany, there are doubts whether this is a non-governmental organization. The question is whether they have democratic decision-making processes, and at the end it's an organ that is executing them, or whether you have a group of people which is making the decisions on behalf of everyone else. And I don't want to single that group out. It's just a good example that you might have followed more closely in recent times. Why are international organizations important? Because they are the main framework for multilateral diplomacy. This is what you are undertaking tomorrow and on Sunday. Multilateral diplomacy. What is it? I don't know. There's no single definition. But when it happens, you can see it. So you know when it's going on, even without much of a definition. And it's increasingly the approach that is used when we are trying to solve problems, because, as you have seen in your preparation, the nature of the challenges that we have are international, are interconnected. We need to have a place where we are discussing about this. So it requires a cooperation of many. This way of multilateralism has different stages, different forms of development. You cannot say this is multilateralism and this isn't. It depends on the format you are using. For some areas we are dealing with, it's only an international conference. You have a World Summit on Health. So it's a conference. That's the only place of where multilateralism is taking place. You have international organizations like the UN, where it is more sophisticated. And you have something like the European Union, where multilateralism means that you actually have an institution that can make law for the member states. So what is happening in Brussels has to be implemented in Germany. Multilateralism means, with regard to the European Union, that, and this is an estimate, at least half of all of the legislation that is passed by the Bundestag has actually been decided at the European Union level already. That's the most intense form of multilateralism that we have already. That's the European Union. If you want to know what level of multilateralism you are dealing with, you can look at the same basic structure that you find in all of the organizations you are going to deal with. There's always, independent of the organization, there's one body which is going to make binding decisions for the organization, for all of the other members. In the UN, it's the Security Council. In the European Union, it's the Council of the European Union, the heads of state and government, sometimes the Council of Ministers, depending on the subject. In NATO, it's the Atlantic Council. They make binding decisions for everyone else. The problem is not everyone is represented there necessarily. So you always have a body where all of the member states are represented. And in the UN, this is the General Assembly. In the European Union, it's the Parliament of the European Union. You also have a Parliamentary Assembly of NATO, for instance. And then what you find everywhere is an administrative and executive body, which is implementing the decisions. This is what is the Secretariat of the UN, for instance. It's the European Union Commission. These are like the three elements that make out multilateralism. They all influence each other. The Secretariat is preparing decisions for the large group of member states. The large group of member states need to agree on something, and then the decision-making body needs to make a decision. The mandate and the competences of these different elements tell you about the level of multilateralism that you can get there. To give you an example, there's a lot of criticism and complaint about that the Security Council of the UN cannot do anything about the war in Ukraine. You can criticize it, of course. You can analyze it. But the Security Council is exactly doing what it was created for. It's exactly following the mandate and the limits of multilateralism. If I want to reach a different stage of multilateralism, I have to reform the organization. But these 5 permanent members were given a veto to prevent that they can ever go to war against each other directly. And this is why for exactly this situation the veto was given. I can say it's no longer what we need. But be careful when you read this criticism, and be careful when you think about solutions. Is this the framework of multilateralism that we have, or is it the one that we would like to have? And this is important for making your decisions on what you are trying to negotiate for. So for the UN, if you use these 3 different elements, you can find all of them here. You find the Secretariat for executing it. You find the International Court of Justice for a particular framework of multilateralism just related to justice questions. You have the Security Council, the General Assembly, and the Economic and Social Council. The Trusteeship Council is something in between. It's a selection of member states making decisions on behalf of the larger group, but limited, and this is the reason why they have a limited membership. They have a limited mandate on what they can discuss. But let's get back to the subject of your conference. How is all of this related to nationalism? These international organizations, as I said, were created by states to balance national interests with international needs. The UN was created for the particular purpose of providing a collective security organization which prevents a war similar to that started by Germany in 1939, and for that reason to also work on human rights and development. It's a security organization, which is, by the way, also something a lot of people forget from time to time. The European Union was created to prevent that states in Europe compete again for economic supremacy. This was considered to be one of the reasons of the Second World War and the First World War and a few wars before that, So the idea is, I integrate the economies, I create a common economic space, so it's a joint interest and it's no longer something where countries can compete for supremacy. So for nationalism, the European Union, with regard, at least originally with regard to economic competition, is the organization they created for that reason. Within these international organizations, always depending on what level of multilateralism they have, states hope to work for a positive balance according to their national interests. All states are going there with the same instructions that you have for your negotiations. If I go and negotiate on behalf of the Secretary General, I have a list of instructions, and this is what I have to follow. This is what I'm paid for. And why it's important for democracies to do this, I just explained. This is not reprehensible. This is inherent in an international system. And it's also important because multilateralism is based on the equality of states and on their sovereignty. An international organization is not the place where Greenland can tell the United States what they think is best for them and what they should do. This is a disregard for the equality of nations, and it's a disregard of national interests. So don't be afraid of the national interests you are representing. The best way then of balancing these different interests in the long term is to create norms. Norms mean that I find a regulation for a lot of different situations that are similar, and I try to agree in advance how I'm going to regulate them. Take an example. Take refugee flows. There's a war in one country, people want to flee, they want to go into the neighboring countries. Instead of negotiating every time when this is happening, whether these people have to be received or not, what kind of rights they have, how you should treat them, you create norms, you create refugee law. You say this is what we agree on to do every time that this is going to happen. So we try to solve as many similar situations as possible, and in order to see whether this is functioning or not, we need to have supervising mechanisms to see whether countries actually follow this or not. This is why there are agreements today on so many different areas. On human rights, we have the Paris Agreement on climate change, we have the conduct of war, we have, just because it's topical at the moment, obligations on states occupying the territory of other states. The main work of international institutions, of those where you are going to negotiate, is to make sure that the result of what you agreed on is respected by everyone. So the question is not, because countries are very different, their populations are diverse, we have different cultures, we have different religions, history, we have traditions. This is why these norms should concentrate and do concentrate on the result. The way how I'm going to do it is my decision as a country, primarily. But what I'm going to be held accountable for by other countries is that the result is going to be reached. Of course, and this is where we come back to democracy, there are certain forms and ways how governments behave that are probably incompatible of reaching the goal. If you have a government where, take an extreme, torture is a recognized legal means of extracting confessions from possible terrorists, It's difficult if you entered into a human rights provision saying, I'm going to prevent torture. Probably it's incompatible. But this is not the primary concern of the international organization. The international organization is looking at the result. This also means that these international norms cannot be compared to national legislation. And you will have discussed, and you will discuss in the next couple of days, I'm sure, where people will complain that they are so weak, they cannot be implemented. Why are we doing this? Everyone is breaking it. All of this frustration that is coming out with international norms. I don't agree, and for various reasons, and I give you two. These norms in international organizations, where all of the states are equal, they are negotiated by state representatives. I didn't elect them. I cannot vote for them. They negotiate in their national interest, and hopefully it's in the interest of their people. If then I would agree that a powerful state who has the means can implement the norms that they might have negotiated by reaching a majority through different means, that they can even enforce it against weak states. I don't think that this is going to get us closer to peace and understanding and solving these problems. So I'm fine with that they cannot be implemented this way. And why am I fine with it? Because I made the experience that positive motivation is much more effective than sanctions. If people can act in their own interest and implement the international norms they agreed on, that's the strongest possible solution you can have to implement them. This is what we call in negotiations to create a win-win situation. This is why I put it in red. Try to create win-win situations when you negotiate. Try to look at the interest of the other party and find a way that this interest is met at the same time with yours. And you don't have to agree on why it's the common interest. To be a little bit drastic, you don't have to agree on that climate change exists. As long as you find people around working on climate mitigation measures, that's good enough. How do you get there? I will share with you what I think is the most important negotiation tip for your next 2 days. Transaction costs. Horrible word. What does it mean? It means that by agreeing, doing things together, you save. You have more benefits compared to doing it yourself. Transaction costs with regard to climate change is I create a joint system. I don't do it on my own and then try to convince everyone else to do the same. Transaction costs is the best leverage you can find in international negotiations to find an agreement with others that they say, you know what, we do it together. And we have economic benefits, we have political benefits, people will like us more as governments, and we will reach something that is in our common interest. So, to summarize, keep in mind, we look at results. This is what we want to get out of multilateral processes. We don't have to agree on why we are doing it and what the motivation is and whether one side is more right and more moral than the other, and this is we can discuss endlessly as long as we can agree. And sometimes, instead of convincing others to believe the same that I believe, I refer to transaction costs. I say it's cheaper for you. go for that. If this is the basis of the agreement, the world will be saved as well as if you had agreed on any kind of other principles. So go ahead and negotiate. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your remarks on the intricate relationship between various key ideas, especially democracy, nationalism, and international institutions, in particular the UN, and the importance of creating a win-win situation during negotiations. Delegates and chairs, you now have time to ask questions to Professor Dr. Strauss. Once called on, please use the microphone in front of you. If you do not have a microphone at your seat, please wait for a member of the administrative staff to bring you one. Are there any questions in the House? Yes.
So my question would be,
Can you raise your hand? I can. Okay.
So my question would be, does an NGO always have to be democratic to be called an NGO, or if it's not democratic, is it then a civil society? Or
the short answer is yes. The longer answer is who is going to judge it. It depends on the government. When you register for a national government, they might not require this. What I'm referring to with regard to this minimum is what you need to get a status at the ECOSOC Council. So when NGOs apply for a consultative status with ECOSOC, this is one of the criteria that is looked at to make sure that this civil society is representing a larger group. The problem is NGOs are not standing for elections. They are not voted on. I can create an NGO with 3 people who have a very particular interest. But that at least those 3 people are represented, that are members. The requirement is this minimum democratic structure. So for ECOSOC, you need it.
Thank you. Are there any more questions in the House? Please raise your hands or placards. Nigeria, in the back.
If people are so unhappy that the Security Council cannot do a lot about, for example, the war in Ukraine, should maybe the Security Council be reformed in a way that it can do more about the war in Ukraine?
I mean, you will know that there are a lot of discussions on that. My own experience in the organization for more than 20 years, including in the council, is, for me, these discussions of that there will be a big reform is maybe a distraction from looking at what could really be done. There are possibilities to work on the procedure and on the way how the council is working that might be much more effective than waiting for any of these 5 members giving up their veto. I don't think it's going to happen. So, and I don't necessarily think that this is a bad result, because all of those people who are saying, well, the Security Council should do something on Ukraine. So let's think about it. What are they going to do? They pass a resolution and they give the United Nations all possible means to stop the war in Ukraine. Who's going to do it? The US, NATO, everyone else? Who's going to stop anything? It's exactly what NATO is not ready to do at the moment. Why should they do it based on a Security Council resolution? So when you hear about these things, you know enough with what you know now about the UN. Think about it, who is saying it, what is said, and think 2 steps further, and you will see that maybe it's not the obvious solution that it seems to be.
Are there any more questions in the House? Please raise your placards. Delegate of Qatar, or Qatar.
Do you believe that the Security Council is still a useful institution?
if even when something is passed, nothing gets done about it, or nothing would get done, especially in the case of Ukraine and Russia?
It depends on what kind of indicators you are using for that nothing is happening. And there you need to be careful with what is reported and what is happening. During all of these 2 years, while the Ukraine situation was going on, the Council agreed on a number of important measures on other situations. They created missions, they closed missions, they had commissions of inquiry, they passed sanctions on other governments and so on. The Security Council is working. It can't do something on Ukraine because of the veto, but it is working, it is doing its work. So the Security Council is also a body of, it's also people. All of these ambassadors, even though they work on their instructions, they are also human beings. And none of them would like to sit in endless meetings and just do nothing all day. So they start and they manage to agree on a number of important things to do in parallel. But they are not necessarily reported as prominently as when they don't manage to get a resolution passed with regard to Gaza or Ukraine at the moment. So if you go on the internet, look at the program of work of the Security Council for last month, and have a look at what they worked on, and you will see that the body is working. They are very busy. They just returned from Colombia.
Thank you. We have time for one last question. Are there any such in the House? Delegate of Mexico.
In what aspects do you think that creating international institutions helps on enforcing democratical systems in specific states?
Tough question. I think the first benefit, in particular for societies that live under difficult political systems, is that a government is engaging with others. So at least there's an acknowledgement that they need to interact with others. And at least in my experience, because of national interests, because of national pride, governments would like to look good at these places. So at the moment where a government decides to enter into a multilateral process, into an international organization, as civil society, you have even small but possibilities to influence your government, how they are behaving at the international level. So you have people posting something on social media and so on. And nobody was ever interested in it, reading it, but now they are suddenly interested because your country entered an international organization and is exactly engaging on that subject. So there are possibilities of participation. I wouldn't be optimistic that at the end there will be a democracy resulting in that. But I would also challenge you on what is a democracy and who's judging whom about whether this is a democracy or not. Is it a democracy when I can vote for a head of state and parliament and so on, and I have free elections and so on? But still decisions are made by a very small circle of people who are actually running these institutions for generations, and I won't name any of your countries, but I worked in countries where it was clear that the Ministry of Justice is run by that family, period. And in parliamentary, deputies always came from these three areas. That's it. You can vote until all of your fingers are blue. This is going how it happens. Is this a democracy or not? So I would be careful again looking at what are the abstract elements of a democracy, then looking at what makes a democracy, what makes participation influencing decisions of decision makers, and their NGOs maybe are much more powerful, even in a repressive state, then they might engage in what we would consider a free democracy. So, short answer, yes, I think it will have an impact on the functions of democracy.
Thank you, Professor Dr. Strauss, for your time and efforts in making this ceremony all the more interesting, despite your busy schedule, because of which you will need to leave the ceremony a bit early to get to your next commitment. We ask that you accept this token of our appreciation.
The BERMUN Press video team has been preparing an introductory video for the conference. Please direct your attention to the screen.
Welcome to BERMUN2 2024. BERMUN is a program that is designed by internationalism. Dozens of countries are represented through you, hundreds of international students who have traveled from all around the world here, the Combat Nationalism Berlin, participate at BERMUN2. This year's banner theme is Rising Nationalism, Fortifying International Institutions. Nationalism, just like the diversity fostered at BERMUN, is born out of identity. However, rather than working outwards to promote collaboration, it is directed inwards. Nationalism promotes the idea of one's own country's superiority above all others. It is exclusive and often justified through the preservation of a national identity. As such, nationalism is detrimental to global cooperation and action. As a movement, nationalism is on the rise globally. Political activists such as Trump in the United States, Bolsonaro in Brazil, or the AfD here in Germany promote this ideology. Nationalism erodes the global institutions that create worlds worth living in. So, what can we do? Well, it so happens that the United Nations represents arguably the most important global institution in the world. The UN has the power to influence policy and to fortify itself against negative influence. For the next 3 days, this is your responsibility. We will strengthen. Through effective lobbying and constructive debate, we are given the chance to find solutions to fortify global institutions against the impeding dangers of rising nationalism. Solutions that have the possibility to change the world. Now, let's see what the Secretariat has to say.
So, we chose the topic rising nationalism and fortifying international institutions just because we saw, especially in the last years, the spread of nationalism throughout the globe. Some examples would be here in Germany, the Alternative für Deutschland, AfD, or in the US, of course, Trump running for re-election, but also in Asia with India and Modi, or even in Brazil and Poland. So it really was seeing the spread of nationalism throughout the globe that made us want to see how we can protect the institution that we are modeling right here, the United Nations, as they're directly harmed by the spread of this national sentiment.
We also wanted to focus on the more negative form of nationalism, specifically the kind that supports the supremacy of one country over another, rather than the form of nationalism that is more of an identity relating to like specific ethnic or cultural indicators. So we thought that this was the most, or like, negative form of nationalism was the most relevant to an international. I think in part, of course, I'm not a political scientist, so I can't speak with complete certainty, but I think that part of it is also just a lack of awareness and political education. People who don't know the historical implications of supporting the supremacy of one ethnicity or one national identity, they will, of course, maybe perpetuate these themselves, and a lack of understanding that international cooperation is very necessary to respond to problems of today.
So, I think it's very hard to find positive effects of rising nationalism. The negative effects of course, it harms international cooperation. Countries start to look more internally, start to exclude other countries from discussions, start leaving treaties and alliances like the Iran nuclear deal or the Paris climate agreement. So these are of course some of the negative effects of nationalism. I think the positive effects are limited.
It's more, the positive effects, I would say, is more in the other definition of nationalism, of having a shared identity, because this isn't inherently a bad thing, because of course people can identify with something without believing that they are the absolute best in that category. So we think that the other definition of nationalism as a power to unite is what I think I would consider.
Because that would start going into the idea of patriotism, which could be seen as a uniting force, which could actually increase international cooperation. It's strengthening the very thing we're modeling right here, the United Nations. We have to make sure that delegates are working towards solutions that will fortify, as in our theme, the international institutions that have been so essential for our globalized world, especially when we're seeing high levels of immigration across every nation and every state. We need international institutions and we need global cooperation. And that is why delegates have to find solutions with other countries that will help fortify these institutions against the rise of nationalism.
And even bringing it to a more personal level, every single one of us is coming to this conference with our own biases, because we are part of ethnic groups, we have our own culture and heritage and background. So of course we can apply nationalism to a much smaller scale, but when we're interacting with other people. So my message to all delegates would be to try to also look past these nationalist tendencies that we all have to some extent, and in order to facilitate the most effective cooperation.
Are you excited for BERMUN2?
I'm looking forward to it. I like working with students. I like eating their potato salad. It's good. Fresh homemade banana bread. Really good. Flapjacks from England. It's not a bad life.
Nice.
Thank you to Zoe Lehmann, Nola Hiller, Adam Swadek-Evenstein, and Solomon Iro for giving us such an enthusiastic and informative start to the conference. Thank you for motivating and inspiring us to lead discussions on what nationalism means and how we can strengthen our global cooperation and international institutions to counteract the spread of extreme nationalist beliefs. Please join us in giving them one more much-deserved round of applause.
Next, it is my pleasure to introduce this year's Secretary General, Paul Kepler-Goris. Paul has been part of the program for many years and is one of our most dedicated members, mainly focusing on the Security Council. His contributions to our theme discussions and help with administrative work have helped make this conference possible. Mr. Secretary General, you now have the floor.
Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will be as one. Can you imagine a world without countries? Would this be, as John Lennon imagined, a life in peace with nothing to kill or die for? Some do. Ideas of a world without states and nations have existed since the dawn of these very concepts. We live in a world with many dreams of what the world should look like. Lenin seemed to dream of some sort of anarchism, a world without any countries. In contrast, Immanuel Kant dreamed of a world republic consisting of republics under one universal government. And we have seen this to some degree become a reality with the United Nations. The European Union also serves as an example of this dream on a smaller scale, creating a superordinate identity that has transcended borders. According to this graph from the EU, and as shown in a dark and light blue, on average, more than half of the people in the EU are either strongly identifying or identifying as European. Yet in this graph, showing the percentage of Europeans identifying with their nationality, on average, more than 60% still strongly identify or identify with their state, as once again shown in dark and light blue, with most subordinating their European identity to their state identity. Even Hungary, a country with 76% of the population identifying with Europe, still has more identifying with the state, this number being 87%. Our deepest connections are to our states. This allegiance, while potentially divisive, as shown by the resurgence of nationalism globally, can also be used positively. From a realist perspective, as Milana defined earlier, the world is built upon states, as they are the main source of power within the global arena. On a spectrum of what an individual's relationship to the state should be, the two extremes would be anarchism, as John Lennon imagined, and totalitarianism. As an individual, we are stuck on the spectrum. We have to decide which relationship will help fortify international institutions. Let us explore what relationship between individual and state will best fortify international institutions. To explore this relationship, we first have to understand the need for states. States are an artificial construct. What makes them concrete reality is the people and citizens who feel a sense of belonging to that specific state, whether through pride in the healthcare system as in Canada or pride in the welfare state as in Denmark. States give people an identity and a purpose for which they will work to solve problems, not just for themselves, but for everyone. This identity is key in establishing a sense of trust on a national level. This trust is directly linked to an increase in trust in international institutions. According to Swedish political scientists, a mere 17% increase in government confidence increases the odds of more confidence in the UN by as much as 71%. In this study, government confidence was based on a person's confidence in national institutions, such as the Parliament. This relationship was also found true for other international institutions, such as the African Union, the European Union, and the World Trade Organization. This relationship is essential for understanding how to use states to strengthen international institutions. To establish this trust, a state requires cohesion, a united population willing to work towards a set of goals. So what relationship with states will lead to cohesion and ultimately the fortification of international institutions? Two ideas arise for creating this cohesion. First, patriotism, an affinity for a country based on certain values, like those outlined in the Constitution. Second, nationalism, being defined as seeing your ethnic group as superior to others and promoting exclusion. For the past centuries, nationalism has often been the main source of unity for states, actively promoting an us versus them mentality and basing their identity on an ethnicity. Now, we are witnessing a resurgence of these nationalist ideas, whether Erdogan in Turkey, Trump in the US, Orban in Hungary, Xi Jinping in China, or Putin in Russia. Nationalism works completely against what the UN stands for on an international scale, as it promotes exclusion instead of cooperation. An extreme form of nationalism was practiced by the Nazis right here in Germany, not only viewing their ethnic group as superior, but also vying for world domination, with this idea being most closely related to an extreme militant nationalism. This begs the question, why is nationalism still so popular today? As theorized by US political scientist Alexander Wendt, states can act like individuals. Individuals are inherently tribal, fostering the creation of groups and the subsequent discrimination against others. Based on an experiment by Polish psychologist Teifel, students were divided into groups based on arbitrary criteria. One example being the division of people based on under and overestimating the number of marbles in a jar. As obscure as this criteria may sound, whatever group people were put in, they ended up favoring the group and discriminating against others. States also exhibit this kind of behavior. They find common enemies who they intend to discriminate against and exclude. Humans tend towards the mentality of nationalism. So what can get us to higher levels of trust in international institutions? Patriotism might be a solution we have to consider. To quote economic historian Pat Fleece, the big upheavals that are part and parcel of international competition can be weathered much better by people who feel they're unified in a nation than by a population that lacks a clear sense of cohesion, identity, and purpose. If citizens from different races and religions are committed to living together as part of a state, they need a shared idea. Patriotism is one of the strongest foundations for creating this shared idea. Patriotism is what can lead to greater levels of cohesion. But in our globalized world, cohesion should be inclusive, yet exclusive patriotism leans heavily towards nationalism, being defined as seeing your ethnic or cultural nation as superior and excluding others. Instead, one should look for a form of patriotism as often used by Harvard professor Yascha Mounk, one that unifies people under superordinate goals, such as the US Constitution or German Grundgesetz. Instead of being loyal to race or ethnicity, one is bound by the words life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Or, die Würde des Menschen ist unantastbar. Human dignity is untouchable. This concept of patriotism has the potential to bring us to higher levels of national trust, and ultimately greater trust in international institutions. Being united under some kind of unifying goal is crucial to the success of states, because this is how we can establish cohesion to build national trust, which will lead to trust in international institutions. That is why it is enshrined in the national anthems of so many countries, regardless of them being authoritarian or democratic. In Germany, Einigkeit und Recht und Freiheit, unity and justice and freedom. Or the Chinese anthem, Women Wanzhong Yixing, us millions with one heart. Effective diplomacy can only happen if we create states willing to cooperate. That is why inclusive patriotism is so important. It can lead to greater levels of international cooperation. Exclusive patriotism, ethnic nationalism, militant nationalism, and totalitarianism pose significant threats to global stability and cooperation. On the other side, a world of anarchism, most likely leading to global chaos. So we can try to find a middle ground by adapting our idea of patriotism to a more inclusive patriotism based on superordinate ideas rather than ethnicity or race, thereby creating inclusive, patriotic states willing to globally cooperate. Especially in our globalized world, where conflicts are not confined to the borders of a state, but rather now pose a challenge to the world as a whole. As is exemplified by climate change, cooperation on an international level is a must. So when we look at the conference theme of rising nationalism and fortifying international institutions, a solution may not lie in John Lennon's dream of anarchism or the other extremes of nationalism and totalitarianism. But rather, the dream we should try to pursue is finding a middle ground rooted in inclusive patriotism to build states willing to cooperate and fortify international institutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General, for your remarks on nationalism and how inclusive patriotism can help foster a collective belief in international institutions. Please accept this token of our appreciation.
For the past few months, it has been our pleasure to work with this year's team of student officers. We firmly believe that their contribution to each committee in terms of insight, character, and leadership will enrich all of our experiences at BERMUN2. We will now introduce the student officers of BERMUN2 2024 by their respective committees. When they are called, please join us in giving them a well-deserved round of applause. Student officers, please stand when we call your names.
The chairs of the Junior MUN who are joining us over the live stream are Clement Schmidt, Benny Thomas, and Keo Kaspar. Please let them hear your applause in House 2 from here.
The Presidents of the Security Council are Alfred Justus, James Simanowitz, and Yara Hunshin.
The Presidents of the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia are Zaya Bispolka, Christian Grieve, and Dalian Hanuman.
Presidents of the Economic and Social Council are Jonas Borde, Maike Hardester, and Johanna Kyrielais.
The chairs of the GA6 Legal Committee are Greta Zoll, Benjamin von Schweinitz, and Eva Baker.
The chairs of the Disarmament Committee are Josie Riemer, Philipp Harashta, and Leoba Auxenreiter.
The chairs of the Political Committee are Samuel Beer, Louisa Masson, and Yang Yipang.
We would also like to acknowledge the heads of administrative staff, Julia Schmidt and Cosima Kramer. Additionally, we would like to recognize our press editor-in-chief, Zach Dye. These student officers have proven to be an enthusiastic and resourceful team. Their hard work and commitment will make this year's BERMUN an especially unforgettable event.
At this time, it is my distinct honor to declare the 19th Annual BERMUN2 Conference as officially open. Distinguished ambassadors, you will now have time to address the forum and weigh in on the conference theme. We will be calling on 6 speakers at a time. Please hold your applause until all 6 speeches are finished. After these speeches, we will be accepting rights to reply. A right to reply is a rhetorical question to one of the speakers which will not be answered. We ask that you keep your rights to reply clear and concise. If you are called on for a right of reply, please use the microphone in front of you by pressing the button. If you do not have a microphone, please wait until a member of the admin staff gives you one. The first speaker will be randomly selected by co-founder of the BERMUN program, Frau Hövermann. After that, we will be calling on speakers alphabetically. Ambassadors, if your name is called, please approach the podium in the order that you have been called on. Once again, please hold your applause until all 6 speeches are finished.
The winner is Denmark.
Fellow delegates and honorable visitors, we meet here today to discuss many important issues and topics that are not relevant only to nations present here, but to all nations worldwide. We find ourselves at a critical juncture in history where echoes of the past haunt our present and threaten our future. The specter of rising foreign nationalism seems large, casting a dark shadow over the values of tolerance, inclusivity and cooperation that we hold very dear as an international organization. Denmark, of course, has not been immune to the rising foreign ideologies. We're witnessing xenophobia, the demonization of marginalized communities, and the erosion of the principles that underpin our valid democratic society. This not only undermines the social fabric of our nation, but also poses a direct threat to global peace and security. Far-right ideologies offer simplistic solutions to complex problems. It seeks to divide us by the lines of race, ethnicity, and religion, rather than unite us in our shared humanity. As representatives of the international community, we seek international cooperation where they seek international destruction. Let us work together to build a world where tolerance triumphs over hatred and where the rights and dignity of every individual are respected and protected. With this, we thank you to think about the topics at hand. Thank you.
Following alphabetically, we will hear from ambassadors of France, Germany, Guyana, Iran, and Israel. Please line up on the right side of the podium. Please hold your applause. Thank you. After you have held your opening speech, please wait until all other speakers have finished their speeches before returning to your seat. Please also be reminded that speeches should not be longer than 1 minute. After 1 minute has passed, we will hit the gavel to remind you to come to your closing remarks. Please give every ambassador the respect that they deserve and listen attentively. Ambassador of France, you now have the floor.
Honored Secretariat, esteemed Madam President, distinguished delegates. An old ghost has crept back into our world, a demon from a time that we as a nation of France had hoped to see long gone. Nationalism is on the rise and is threatening the fragile peace that we created, the fragile peace between our united nations. In the face of recent developments, humanity must stand united, not divided by national interests or political ideologies. The delegation of France urges all members to sanction and condemn states such as the Russian Federation that have taken on a path of international isolationism through nationalistic fervor, distancing themselves from and refusing to cooperate with international institutions, disregarding the respective laws of the international community. Therefore, let us all commit to consolidating intergovernmental institutions. Let us all commit to preventing the rise of identitarian nationalism, and let us instead commit to fostering a united human spirit to find our strengths and our destiny as a world. Thank you.
Dear Secretariat, dear delegates, distinguished guests, we are honored to attend the 2024 BERMUN, and this year's topic, Rising Nationalism, was the delegation of Germany much. We hope to find solution of this as arising issues at the conference. We hope for fruitful debates, and we look forward to the following few days. Thank you.
Esteemed Presidency and distinguished fellow delegates, judges, advocates, admin, directors, and guests. The Islamic Republic of Iran appreciates the opportunity to address the esteemed members of this Assembly on the critical issue of fortifying international institutions. Iran understands the complexities and challenges associated with rising nationalism, having experienced its effects both domestically and within the global community. While nationalism can sometimes serve as a catalyst for unity and identity within nations, it also has the potential to create mistrust, exacerbate tensions between states, and undermine the principles of multilateralism and collective security. In recent years, we have witnessed a resurgence of nationalist ideologies across various regions, accompanied by a growing skepticism towards international cooperation and institutions. Iran firmly believes that fortifying international institutions is essential to effectively counter the divisive forces of nationalism and uphold the values of multilateralism, diplomacy, and cooperation. Iran looks forward to a fruitful and constructive conference and wishes all delegates and participants good luck. Thank you.
Honorable Secretary, distinguished ambassadors, esteemed delegates, dear observers, and everyone else, shalom. On behalf of the, despite some parties' attempts, still free nation of Israel, we are thankful to be invited to this Assembly of the United Nations. For many years now, Israel has strived for a political normalization policy with its neighbors, even though these efforts have now ultimately failed. On October the 7th, an act against international relations and human rights shocked our whole nation and the free world. Hamas' unprovoked attack showed once more that Islamistic terrorists do not know the difference between soldiers, civilians, and children. Palestine, defining themselves as a state, which they are clearly not, are trying their hardest to support a terrorist group instead of helping their civilians. And what do we do with terrorists? We fight them in order for a free world to be restored, in order to bring back democracy. And that is what the free world stands for. That is what we should stand for. Therefore, we will continue to work on fulfilling the total eradication of state-financed terrorism. Do or do not, there is no try. Thank you. We have the floor.
Delegate of Guyana, you now have the floor.
Nationalism is an infantile disease, said Albert Einstein. It undermines the very foundation of international cooperation, peace, and security. Cherishing your country and putting your people first, feeling rooted in your culture, in short, patriotism. The spirit of unity is a valuable asset to promote sustainability as well as stability and a sense of collective purpose. However, when patriotism turns into nationalism, when the government and people of one nation feel superior to their neighbors, pride morphs into arrogance and discrimination, and peace is at risk. Often, issues such as political instability and a divided society are exploited by populist parties to gain a foothold in politics. The unrest is blamed on a certain group of people, creating a we versus them ideology. Throughout history, so many lives have been lost in wars over borders, and the UN was founded to unite all sovereign countries to protect world peace. By fortifying and respecting international institutions and courts, we can settle border disputes fairly, diplomatically, and peacefully. We must stand together in the spirit of the United Nations to uphold the principles on which we are founded: justice, cooperation, and most of all, peace. Thank you.
Thank you, ambassadors. If there are any delegates wishing to make use of a right to reply, please raise your placards now. Delegate of Malta, followed by the delegate of Poland, in that order.
Does the delegation of Israel recognize that there are many indiscriminatory airstrikes on Palestinians and their infrastructure, and many UN experts warn of a genocide on the Palestinian people?
It's not a POI.
How can the delegate for Israel stand before us and speak so harshly of the Palestinian people when the International Court of Justice has ruled that it is likely that they have committed genocide?
Thank you, delegates. Ambassadors, please return to your seats.
The next opening speeches will be coming from Italy, Kenya, Malta, Nigeria, Peru, and Poland. Ambassadors, please approach the podium.
Honorable Presidency, fellow delegates and guests, being able to represent Italy at this BERMUN General Assembly is an honor. But it is an honor that is demanding great responsibility and isn't light like luxury. Fortifying international organizations like the United Nations, which are closer to the people, capable of meeting their needs for security and well-being, and prepared to shield them from the traps of our evolving present, offers numerous opportunities to combat the negative realities of growing nationalism. Our primary objectives include promoting inclusiveness and compromise in time of crises and achieving international peace and security. In order to solve serious and pervasively unstable circumstances, these concepts are important. And for that reason, we are here with you today. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, it is with great honor that we address everyone on the pressing issue of rising nationalism. In recent years, we have witnessed an upsurge in nationalism worldwide. While it is natural for citizens to take pride in their national identity, it becomes a matter of concern when this pride shifts to an aggressive form of nationalism that threatens peace and harmony for a country and our international community. The rise in nationalism, if left unchecked, can lead to increased tensions, conflicts, and a disregard for international law. However, let us not forget that nationalism also has potential to unite us, to instill a sense of belonging, and to drive nations towards self-improvement. It is this positive aspect of nationalism that we must promote. Thank you, and we wish you all a productive conference.
Honorable Chair, Honorable President, delegates, and guests. Is the free market that the world strives towards really free if presumptions are made about potential trade partners based on their nationality or ethnicity? If the perception of a nation is based on stereotypes about its people, how can it be expected to see hope in the future? Fair and equal access to the international market is crucial for creating a better world for future generations. Foreign governments and companies have been active within Nigeria for decades, but not in healthy and fair ways. The oil extraction within our country is not helping our people achieve a better life, nor is it helping the world in its fights against climate change. Nigeria has a lot to offer the world, if only the world could look at more than our oil alone. For example, there are lots of ways to optimize the Nigerian deltas to produce hydroelectricity. Nigeria strongly urges MDCs to once again review potential trade agreements with LDCs focused on green energy production and other future sectors. Thank you.
Thank you. As a quick announcement, ambassadors, when you are lining up, please do not lean against the screen because it's quite expensive and we don't want to damage it. So just take a step forward, please. Thank you. Delegate of Peru.
Honorable Chair, esteemed fellow delegates, dear guests. Once as Harvard PE said, the reality is that international institutions like the UN can only be as effective as its members allow it to be. To the delegation of Peru, this is certainly operative to this year's conference topic. We believe that it is imperative for us to strengthen and uphold the international institutions that serve as the bedrock of our interconnected world due to nationalism's potential to breed division and undermine the principles of multilateralism and corporations that are essential for global peace and prosperity. Simultaneously, we acknowledge the critical importance of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in maintaining security and preventing the spread of nuclear weapons all across the world. Our delegation stands firm in its support for the NPT and its objectives. Peru firmly believes that through open communication mutual respect, and a willingness to compromise, we can achieve meaningful progress towards a safer and more secure world for all. Thank you. Honourable Chairs, esteemed delegates, as we speak, conflicts and barriers are developing across the globe as countries fall into increasingly protectionist and suspicious policies. Following our recent general election and government overhaul, we feel it especially vital to discuss and help spearhead the process of globalisation as we have removed our nationalist agenda, our national conservative agenda, and are moving towards a cooperative and sustainable ideology. We can hold both a strong national identity and culture while simultaneously maintaining international unity in the fight against those avaricious, self-serving career politicians such as Putin, who seek to undermine global stability in the pursuit of their own selfish and discriminatory policies. Cooperation and unity within our governments and international organisations will form the pillars required to create a successful future and positive development. We look forward to the next 3 days of fruitful and productive debate. Thank you.
Thank you, ambassadors. Oh, Malta.
Honourable Chairs, fellow delegates, the United Nations are desperately needed to address the ongoing wars and humanitarian crisis collectively. Nevertheless, we see countries doing whatever they like with no accountability, to quote Secretary General Antonio Guterres. The delegation of Malta shares his concern as we observe countries ignoring appeals of the General Assembly. As a member of the Security Council, we also face states prioritizing their national interests over safeguarding peace. So we've got to reform the Security Council. We've got to create accountability. Fortifying international institutions, we've got to start with the world's largest one, the United Nations. Thank you.
Thank you, ambassadors. If there are any delegates wishing to make use of a right of reply, please raise your placards now. This will be coming from the Russian Federation.
How can the delegation of Italy speak of fortifying institutions against the spread of nationalism when the Italian state has recently ruled that fascist salutes, an unequivocal expression of hate and nationalism, are illegal at public rallies?
Thank you, delegates. Ambassadors, please take your seats.
Delegates, please come to order. Thank you. The next opening speeches will be coming from Qatar, Republic of Korea, Russian Federation, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, and Sweden. Please ensure that you speak in this order. Ambassadors, please approach the podium.
Honourable Secretariat, distinguished guests, esteemed fellow delegates. Imagine for a moment you are drowning. Your world is going down. You are losing hope. When all of a sudden, a hand reaches out to help you. Do you take it or leave it be? Now, most of us would accept this offer of salvation. But somehow, there are still so many countries that refuse this hand of international cooperation and strong and fortifying institutions, and instead decide to bite it, slap it away, do anything to get rid of it. As they drown in the war-torn, chaotic and uncertain times of today. As Ambassador of Qatar, I am proud to say that we are a nation that has always valued the global exchange and peaceful cooperative mediation, a value that we have recently proved once again
at the forefront of negotiations concerning the Gaza conflict. On that note, Qatar extends the hand of friendship in hopes of fruitful debates and constructive exchange here at BERMUN2 2024.
Honorable Secretariat, esteemed chairs, fellow delegates, and distinguished guests. We, the delegation of the Republic of Korea, are honored to attend the 2024 Berlin Model United Nations II Conference. By aiming to initiate peace, we are holding up our role as a reliable partner, contributing to the efforts of the international community. Living in close proximity to the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, we understand the value of freedom as we persistently find ourselves in threat of growing potential of an attack. This experience has instilled in us a profound understanding of protecting our global community and human freedom by the rule of law. The Republic of Korea extends its hand of friendship to each delegation present, hoping to pave the way for a more secure future for all. Thank you.
Greetings, esteemed chairs and esteemed officers and fellow delegates. The delegation in Russia would like to preface the statement that the Russian Federation has been tirelessly working as a steadfast proponent for the resolution of global issues for as long as it has been a member of the international stage. And as President Putin once said, Russia does not need external enemies. We have enough enemies within the country. We need to be friends with everyone. Unite for the common good, for the preservation of our common home, and for making it a comfortable and safe place. And at this critical juncture, where nationalism threatens the prosperity of the world with promises of strife and misfortune, compounded with issues that bring the world together yet split us apart, is when we need to be the most united against the issues that plague us. From the intangible and inalienable rights of free speech to the most grave and physical threat of nuclear weapons, saboteurs seek to diminish Russia's reputation at every turn with baseless slander and a spiteful expression of their anti-human sentiments. This is the time to act. As one species, one united people, with no place for propagandists, nor wanton anarchists who threaten the glorious collaboration that brings mankind closer to utopia. The delegation of the Russian Federation looks forward to fruitful dialogue with its fellow delegates. Thank you.
Dear President of the General Assembly, Secretary Generals, and Directors, fellow delegates, and guests. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is honored for the opportunity to speak and welcomes everyone at the conference today. We are very excited to work with the topics and find common ground on nuclear non-proliferation, refugee convention, and integrity of journalism, which are all directly affected by nationalism rising worldwide. During the complicated and uncertain times we're all living through, it is very, very easy to give in to the panic, forget our history, and completely undermine the dangers of the discord among the nations. That is exactly what we're going to serve as an example to the good people of the world. We will live up to their expectations and ensure a peaceful and comfortable life for our citizens, despite the challenges we face. As a wise man once said, the cheapest kind of pride is a national one. Ladies and gentlemen, let's not lose our heads and remind ourselves what we as humans really stand for. Thank you.
Madam Presidents, Secretary Generals, Honorable Chairs, Delegates and Guests. Let us preserve our nationality, and with our nationality, our national character. As a quote from Daniel of Milan, a believing nationalist that was responsible for the brutal segregation of South Africa's citizens. We know what extreme nationalism can lead to, experiencing its repercussions to this day. Shouldn't we work together to prevent the resurgence of divisive ideologies? Shouldn't we stand united against the forces of division and racism? This challenge demands collective action, drawing from our past of separation to shape an inclusive future. South Africa remains steadfast in combating these threats, recognizing their growing significance in the political landscape. Let us fight together against extreme nationalism, united in our quest for a future defined by solidarity and equality. Thank you.
We must learn to live together as brothers or perish together as fools. Martin Luther King Jr.
Madam President, fellow delegates, distinguished guests. Today, all of us have gathered here to discuss the rising nationalism across the globe. Furthermore, how we can strengthen our cooperations to fortify international institutions. As the Kingdom of Sweden, we are here to work together towards a resolution. In a time with wars occurring in several countries and the ongoing problem of climate change, our nations need to form a unity and collaborate to reach solutions for worldwide problems. As we witness the increasing nationalism in various countries, it has become a topic of utmost importance to secure our international community and institutions. This should be a warning to all of us to not let this undermine the very principles on which this esteemed organization was founded. We, the delegation of Sweden, are looking forward to a great conference with a lot of productivity. Thank you.
Thank you, ambassadors. If there are any delegates wishing to hold a right of reply, please raise your placards now. Delegate of the United Kingdom, followed by the delegate of Ukraine, followed by Tanzania.
For the delegate of Russia, how can you speak about being friends with everyone and acting together while attacking the Ukraine?
The delegation of Ukraine was wondering exactly the same thing. How could you mention being an innocent country while slaughtering our men, women and children?
To the delegation of Russia, how do you want to strengthen international institutions while still blocking the justified evolution of the UN Security Council?
Thank you, delegates. Ambassadors, please take your seats.
The next opening speeches will be coming from the ambassadors of Switzerland, Tanzania, Tunisia, the United States, Ukraine, and the United Kingdom. Ambassadors, please approach the podium.
Honorable President of the General Assembly, Secretary General, Deputy Secretary Generals, and fellow delegates. The Swiss Confederation is a multilingual country hosting many international institutions and NGOs. We have shown a willingness to settle international disputes peacefully and mediate global conflicts. As a neutral country, we believe peace and cooperation are central to improving welfare. Strengthening international institutions in these times is more important than ever, and agreements must be upheld to ensure lasting peace. International law is to be respected by all, and rules apply to MEDCs the same way as to LEDCs. While national interests can bring people together, they can slip away internationalism and contribute to aggression towards others and cause humanitarian suffering. Switzerland is committed to working towards a more peaceful, just, and fair world for all. We call upon all member states to focus on international cooperation to prevent wars and unnecessary suffering. Thank you.
There might be the cliché that every African state has been suppressed by colonial history, stays poor and overly underdeveloped. So do you believe it is possible for an African nation like Tanzania to establish one of the safest and politically most stable countries on our continent? To even have a female leader making clear and unambiguous decisions that even developed countries struggle with? Honorable Secretary General, Deputy Secretary General, President of the General Assembly, fellow chairs, directors, delegates, and distinguished guests. You see, of course we need support from developed countries to fix the economical, environmental, and social disadvantages our nation is still affected by. Nonetheless, we are just as crucial of a part of global society. Hence, we also view ourselves as a role model for every state wanting to thrive as a sovereign identity, to be able to assist in fortifying international institutions and be involved in global debates. The United Republic of Tanzania is delighted to be your spark of hope. Thank you.
Honorable President and Secretary General, dear chairs and fellow delegates, being the first state in the Arab world influenced by modern nationalism, we believe that, as Maxime Bernier says, nationalism can be a destructive force when it promotes intolerance and division, but it can also be a force for good when it seeks to defend local autonomy against the forces of larger entities. Over the past decade, rising nationalism is seen everywhere and in everything. It can be seen as both conservative and revolutionary. Thus, with an increased sense of competition among nations, it was and will be harder and difficult for us to change and solve problems in this current world. We need to take a step forward with creativity and thought, and thus come to solutions. Thank you for having us here.
Dear delegates, esteemed chairs, honorable guests, we must join together to protect and reinforce the institutions which we have maintained. In recent times, conflicts have arisen all around the world, namely the war in Ukraine and the Israel-Palestine conflict. We have failed to prevent these conflicts from escalating, exposing flaws in our institutions and making it clear that we must strengthen and empower them so that they have credibility with the international community and the ability to create change. Furthermore, we believe that institutions such as the IMF and the World Bank hold an important role in maintaining a democratic world where every citizen has a say in their country's actions. History has taught us that economic instability gives way to corruption and allows governments to be manipulated and controlled by wealth. International organizations which help countries stabilize their economy and help foster economic growth have shown us the power they can have in helping countries maintain a strong and democratic leadership. Lastly, we must hold these institutions accountable and make sure that they take responsibility for their actions. For too long have we allowed international institutions to act under the belief that if something were to fail, we would not hold them accountable. We must put an end to this and make sure international organizations are held to a fair and just standard. Dear delegates, please join together with us to create a better and more united world. Thank you.
Honorable chairs, fellow delegates, dear guests, in 2 days' time it will have been exactly 2 years since the Russian Federation has unrightfully attacked the proud and sovereign nation of Ukraine, violating international law and committing genocide against the men, women and the children of our proud and sovereign nation. With almost 10,000 Ukrainians killed, and even more than that still missing, the nation of Ukraine would like to remind every country present at this conference that this has only been made possible by a nationalist dictator being Russia's head of state. The people of Ukraine are worried by the rise of nationalism all around the world, and this will inevitably lead to more dictatorships being established, to more wars being started, and to more people having to suffer in the same way every Ukrainian has suffered in the last 2 years. The democratically elected government of Ukraine is open to talk to and cooperate with any country, acknowledging the risks of nationalism and the pain and suffering Russia has caused the Ukrainian people with its unprovoked attack and subsequent year-long war. The delegation of Ukraine is positive that this UN conference will help bring the world back together and hopefully stop this war happening right now, right here in Europe. Thank you.
Madam President, Honorable Secretariat, esteemed guests and fellow delegates. While we are perceived by some as clinging to 19th century ideals of isolationism, the United Kingdom boldly defies expectations by championing the indispensable role of international institutions in today's interconnected world. While critics may dismiss the UK's stance as antiquated, it is rooted in a deep understanding that true sovereignty is best safeguarded through global cooperation and collective action. However, as nationalism grips the global stage, the UK faces a pivotal moment: to succumb to the allure of isolationism or to lead by example, reaffirming its commitment to internationalism. Now more than ever, we, meaning every single one of us, must reject the temptation to retreat into the past and embrace the challenges of the present with courage and conviction. The UK stands ready to defy expectations, forging a path forwards that embraces the complexities of our modern world while honoring the lessons of history. Thank you.
Thank you, ambassadors. If there are any delegates wishing to make use of a right of reply, please raise your placards now. This will be coming from the Russian Federation, followed by Croatia.
Is it delegation of Ukraine aware that the Russian government is currently engaged in the vital liberation of ethnic Russians oppressed under the fascist government of Ukraine.
How does the delegation of Swiss plan to establish peace in other countries while staying neutral?
Thank you, delegates. Ambassadors, please take your seats.
The final 4 opening speeches will be coming from Afghanistan, Brazil, Canada, and China. Ambassadors, please approach the podium.
Honorable chairs, distinguished delegates, esteemed staff and guests. The Islamic Republic of Afghanistan has had a troubled history. We stand before you as a country shaped by a long-lasting period of war and guided by the hand of Allah. Over the past decades, many nations failed to ensure stability in countries like ours. Consider the ramifications on global peace that occur when we neglect our duties, when we do not comply to crucial agreements such as the NPT, when we do not ensure equal access to international markets for all countries, when we do not create guidelines for journalism. While we believe that it is the first right of a country to govern himself, we understand that international cooperation is pivotal on all these topics and are open to get involved into joint action with new partners. Afghanistan is a prime example for nations worldwide when embracing the one true purpose of following Allah's law to rise to great strength, and we believe to be a role model for all yet to follow. Thank you.
President of the General Assembly, heads of state and government, ministers, ambassadors, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, there can be no doubt it's an honor for me to speak before you on Brazil's behalf. There can be no doubt that rising nationalism poses a threat to the flourishing of our many societies worldwide. But is a blanket fortification of international institutions the answer? Brazil takes a nuanced view. It is critical, above all, to strengthen regional institutions as they represent the interests and need of the individual members more directly. Fortifying our global international institutions is also important, of course. We need to understand, however, that here strengthening must mean reform. The unjust power imbalances between global north and global south have to be redressed. Thank you. Madam President, honorable chairs, fellow delegates. We are gathered here today to talk about the importance of international institutions in times of rising nationalism and exchange our thoughts on this topic. We as the delegation of Canada are very honored to be a part of that. This topic is of immense importance for each and every one of us, not only because many countries have to face rising nationalism, but also because that affects how we all interact with each other as an international organization, and because we can see in history to what nationalism can lead. So in order to deal with this topic effectively, we have to keep in mind that our differences don't make us weaker, but as our President Trudeau once said, our differences and diversity can be made into a source of strength and resilience, not a source of weakness. Let us act with that knowledge in mind. Thank you for your attention.
Honorable Secretariat, fellow delegates, and esteemed guests. As we have all gathered here today, the People's Republic of China would like to congratulate everyone's Lunar New Year. Ever since ancient times, the Year of the Dragon and the dragon itself has always been a symbol for strength, unity, and ambition. The key aspects which all nations should possess in order to fight the pressing issue of nationalism. Due to challenges posed by the survival of nationalism, especially in countries in the West, we must take immediate action and call for a modernized approach to fortifying international institutions. Apart from just creating tensions, nationalism has threatened the very foundations of global cooperation. The strengthening of international institutions is a key aspect in combating nationalism. Therefore, the People's Republic of China would like to urge all nations to join in on the creation of a global environment where peace and security are prioritized. Thank you.
Thank you, ambassadors. If there are any delegates wishing to make use of a right to reply, please raise your placards now. Delegate of Malta, followed by the delegation of Poland.
How does the delegate of Afghanistan consider to be a role model for other countries if the state is controlled by terrorists who prohibit primary education for girls and violate women's rights?
How can the delegate for Brazil comment on strengthening institutions when their own president was in 2017 convicted of money laundering and corruption?
Thank you, delegates. Ambassadors, please return to your seats.
At this time, we would like to extend our sincerest gratitude to Alexander Gintar, who has worked on perfecting the platform throughout the last years. Alexander, your contributions have been crucial in our digital and in-person conferences. Given that you were a former head of our tech team, it is all the more special that we have been able to work with you once again. Thank you for your fantastic work and efforts to make this conference possible.
Before we adjourn, we have a few brief but very important announcements. If you would like to keep updated with what is happening during the BERMUN conference, the BERMUN press team will report its work on the BERMUN website, BERMUN.de. You can also access this page by clicking on the news section of the BERMUN platform. The press team also has an Instagram account called BERMUN.press. Be sure to stay updated with reports about the entire conference by reading the press page.
BERMUN merch, including mugs, thermoses, tote bags, and a limited number of posters will be available after committee sessions each day in the ground floor foyer. Additionally, please bring a reusable water bottle to the conference. We will have large containers of water with which you can fill them up. Please do not take more than one drink each day from the refrigerators in the hallways to ensure that everyone has one. Furthermore, only take as much coffee or food as you will actually eat in order to minimize food waste.
We would also like to remind you to make sure that we leave this building even nicer than we found it. Please do not leave any trash lying around and do not eat or drink in the rooms unless it is from a closable water bottle. We are incredibly happy to be here in the CAS, and we want to make sure that we reciprocate their hospitality. All participants of BERMUN2, tomorrow at 9 a.m. you will be joining your second committee session in your respective committee rooms. Please arrive by 8:30 and be seated in your committees at 9. I will now read out the room assignments. You can also see these in the BERMUN program on page 5. If you have any confusion about directions, the admin team will be there to help. ECOSOC will be in room 6, and the ICTY will be in room 7. The SC will be in room 226, and the DC will remain here in the forum. The PC will be in the Jakob Kaiser Saal. The GA6 will be in House 2, in room 0.39 through 0.41. Joining them in House 2 will be the Junior MUN in room 0.40. As a final announcement, please do not take the country placards after the ceremony. They will be moved to your respective committee rooms. So again, please leave the country placards on the counter in front of you. As you leave the forum, please enjoy some music from former Secretary General Fincraft. We look forward to seeing you all tomorrow.
Grazie.